Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for a discussion on embedding observability into your engineering culture. This is a Lead Dev webinar created in partnership with Honeycomb. The webinar will last roughly 45 minutes, after which both myself and the panelists will head over to the Lead Dev Slack to answer some of your questions in the observability channel. So let's get started with some introductions. First, I'm Jared Jordan. I am the APAC leader at Netflix, and today I'll be joined by Ryan, Tom, and Liz. Ryan is a software engineering manager leading the monitor group and focused on ensuring that Slack engineers have world-class observability and visibility of their software. Observability is a key aspect of reliability, and Ryan strives to keep Slack reliable for all of their customers. As a hearing impaired individual, Ryan is also a lead of the Abilities ERG Employee Resource Group for all of you, advocating for inclusivity and accessibility for people with disabilities in the workplace and in Slack's products itself. When Ryan's not looking at graphs or helping folks debug software issues, you can find him on his bike in the Marin Headlands or camping with his partner in the mountains. Tom is a senior technologist at ThoughtWorks, who routinely works with delivery teams to foster a culture of collaboration, trust, and shared ownership of quality. He has a penchant for getting things shipped, and as well as bridging the gaps that often exist between ops and engineering. Liz is a developer advocate, labor and ethics organizer, and site reliability engineer with 15 years of experience. She's an advocate at Honeycomb for the SRE and observability communities, and previously was an SRE working on products ranging from the Google Cloud Load Balancer to Google Flights. She lives in Vancouver, BC with her wife, Ellie, and a Samoyed Golden Retriever mix, and in San Francisco and Seattle with our other partners. She plays classical piano, leads an EVE Online Alliance, and advocates for transgender rights. All right, now that we've had these wonderful introductions of our panelists, let's jump to the conversation. Liz, how is the best way for leaders to demonstrate the value of observability with their engineering teams?
So I think that to answer this question, we need to first define what observability is. Secondly, talk about what it looks like if you don't have enough observability. And then third, talk about the difference between lacking observability and having observability. So to me, observability is the ability to understand what's happening inside of your software systems and to be able to debug problems in them that you've never seen before, and without having to push new code, just using the telemetry that's emitted by your applications. So it's not necessarily a specific tool. It's not necessarily the data itself. Instead, it's your ability and your team's ability to analyze that data. When you lack sufficient observability, you find that your teams ship slower. They have larger amounts of technical debt. They're incurring more outages, and it takes forever to resolve those outages because people feel like they lack the visibility into their systems. They have to push new code to figure out what's going on. And that can really slow things down in terms of your development velocity, as well as making your customers not happy with you. So the change that you expect to see when you introduce observability and the business case for observability is that it enables you to ship product faster and to satisfy your customers with a sufficiently high degree of reliability. And it allows you to improve the maintainability of your software stack for the years to come. So we typically look at things like, what's at like the DORA metrics, things related to, how long does it take for your lead time to push changes? How long does it take for you to resolve your outages? And you look to see improvements in those metrics as you improve your observability.
Is there one metric one or two metrics you'd start out with, or is there a playbook for leaders to get started that they could take away with?
Yeah, so I actually published the third article in the Lead Dev series on observability. So it's available on the Lead Dev website, where we talk about some of those business cases and kind of where to get started in terms of making that argument. In terms of where I'd concretely start, a lot of people just start by trying to improve their ability to do break fix. There are a lot of proactive ways to use observability, but I think that the most common pain point that people find is that they can shrink their outage durations by deploying an observability solution that people get started with right away. Sometimes, often, in fact, in the middle of an outage, people will have the one code push that they do be adding tracing so that they can figure out what's going on. So I think that's really powerful. When you start resolving incidents with observability, then that really paves the way for other people to start using it.
Yeah, that's really great. I think when people start taking ownership individually, I think we see the power of observability, and it makes the code quality and our pushes a lot more safer and less risky. Ryan, how can you create a culture, a safe culture that allows engineers to learn and try and test? When you're doing this, like people are going to learn and fail fast, right? So how do they bounce back from that? And then how do you create that culture where people can learn?
Yeah, first of all, I just want to say thank you for having me here. So a safe culture is about trust. And I want to think that observability creates trust, because if you run observability and they opaque, you're going to create a lot of fear inside, because your leadership will managers don't know what's going on at the service. So the first thing I would do is say that truly is paramount. Your deploy pipeline need to have a robust continuous integration suite with instinctive testing and monitor the cache failures. If you have more observability, you truly create safety and trust. And the other thing is that really important is that the quality of the development and test environment really matters here. Like how closely can you approximate production? Do you have critical path testing? Can you exercise and test under code at any time? These are questions that you must answer. So I will recognize that you can't approximate production in most cases. You can run into problems of scalability, and this applies to small companies, to big companies. And sanity measures, Liz Woodward, she stays always touch the production. She had like a t-shirt that stays always touch the production. And I love that shit, but you have to have really good deployment practices for that. You can have green deployments. You can really strong monitoring, so you can actually understand and compare and contrast between your legacy deploy and the new deploy.
Yeah, I think everyone tests in production whether they like to or not, right? It's just a question of how well prepared are you to do it. And the more well prepared you are to test in production, the less you need to invest in your staging environments. I think the other interesting point here that Ryan is alluding to is the point about sharing data, right? Like of having that trust and collaboration that comes from sharing that same view of the data. So you're no longer pointing fingers and saying, Ryan, I think it's your service. My service is fine. Like my data says it's fine.
Yeah. I'm actually about to get to that. The long story short is that one component of trying to test measuring is scenes. And I want to say that Honeycomb would actually implemented and measure the effects of scenes as Slack. We use it extensively as Slack. We use Honeycomb with the query engine, and we made it easy for developers to see the impact of the scene with Honeycomb. And to code to that, particularly create trust. And a place that we can create fear in it. And that's it.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, I think creating trust is a good way to look at it, and also looking at the system holistically. I think when you start looking at the system holistically, like Liz pointed out, that you're not really pointing fingers, because you're just trying to figure out what the resolution is and the fastest way we can get that resolution done. Tom, just right on that what is with that, if you have all these teams and have all these microservices running around, how do you foster a culture of collaboration and trust between not only individuals on a team, but between teams for that shared ownership of view and quality?
Yeah, I would say the key to this is really creating psychological safety, as both Ryan and Lisa have alluded to. But when it comes to the whole idea of shared ownership of quality, first I have to clarify that in my mind, shared ownership implies a shared vision, right? you can't really rally teams to come together to uphold something that is not well defined, right? So that's why it's important to make sure that everyone is on the same page in the first place. Actually, what that means is that your team or your company, depending on your scope of influence, has a solid understanding of how you determine that you're meeting your quality objectives, right? So be that something that's measured from the perspective of users, which is usually the best view to have, or even just looking at, let's say, internal teams. So departments like sales and marketing and customer support, like how do they view quality? How do they view your product and say we're also having a great experience even while supporting this thing. So you want to make sure that you're all on the same page, and there is things that you can use. You can have you can look at like business metrics. You can look at like SLOs and having those defined and saying these are the things that we strive for. This is how we define good quality, so that from the very onset, people have an understanding of this is what good looks like, so that you can tell deviations from that. And then as you're doing that, the second thing that you want to do is to basically ask yourself consider whether you're setting yourself up to promote collaboration, right? And the easiest way of doing that I found is by actively encouraging knowledge sharing. I know, Ryan also just talked about, Honeycomb. And when I first used Honeycomb, I was kind of fascinated by the fact that you had no private queries, so to say, right? Everything was public, everything was in the shared domain. And I think that's the right approach that you want to have. You want to make everything as visible and as transparent as possible. And so you can't just go and say, go and collaborate, right? You have to put systems in place to help people do this effectively, right? So things like, making queries accessible, making runbooks public, those are things that you should start. You can look at things like, recording production incidents and encouraging incident leads to walk through those incidents afterwards to discuss, what were the contributing factors, what are the steps that were taken for resolution, what are the lessons that were learned, right? You can make sure that you're asking folks to debug incidents together, right? Not just solo. And then I think one of the last things, and again, both Ryan and Liz talked about it, is around trust. And I think for me, the key thing is that trust is something that you build up over time, right? It's not something that's instant. You kind of have to build it through the course of repeated experience.
Yeah.
There are some things that you can do to accelerate the trust building exercise. So for example, as a leader, being vulnerable enough to share not only the good, but also the bad, in the hope that those experiences will be learning opportunities. But in general, trust building has to grow organically. Yeah, so I think the combination of those things can really help.
That's great. Yeah, I think you don't want to start establishing trust during an incident. I think it's really a lot better to try to figure out the strategy of building trust as long as you're building in a software development cycle, as you're partnering with teams and you're really talking to them about what is the wanted outcome and what is the wanted position, and then backing up from there. I think all of you guys are touching on those points, is that overall it's building trust and establishing metrics and making sure that everybody is aligned in driving to the same set of metrics that are more helpful to drive the business and the outcome that you want. That's great. That's great. One of the things, Liz, is we have many teams and company cultures where ideas have flown mostly from the top, and you'll get these mandates of doing things, or a few select individuals are the ones that hold the ideas and then kind of drive that vision. But we've seen in our careers, really the magic happens is when everyone gets involved in creating an ideation in these strategies of observability of the culture and building a strategic vision on how we're going to ship software. Do you have a strategy or a framework for getting everyone involved and to feel like and to promote the collaboration from the ground level as opposed to just the top down?
I love what Tom said about making sure that everyone is aligned on what the mission is and being aligned on, what are our goals and giving people the autonomy and flexibility to figure out how are they going to meet those goals. So in particular, when it comes to observability and service operation, I don't think that you're necessarily going to get great results by mandating, you are going to implement CI/CD, you are going to, implement implement retrospectives, right? Like, I think it's a lot better to say, here's the target service level objectives we're aiming for because this is what our customers expect of us, right? And then trust people to figure out the rest. I do think that it's important to do things that build trust before the incident, as you said, Jared. So for instance, things like game days or Wheel of Misfortune, whatever you call it, right? Like where you rehearse what it looks like during an outage so that you have that practice so that your heart isn't racing because it's, the first time you've ever used your incident management process. I think that the more you have collaboration between teams that doesn't flow through the product managers necessarily, doesn't flow through the people managers, right? I think that really creates that room for organic ideas to spring up. And honestly, in addition to it creating great ideas, it also really promotes a decrease in employee turnover, right? Like if people feel like they have autonomy and mastery and impact, right? Like they're going to stay on your team. And I think that that is a huge reason why we really need to focus on being outcome driven rather than kind of focusing on the how you do each thing.
That's great. That's great. Tom, are there any missteps when attempting to promote this culture, collaborative environment, and a safe culture? And do you have an example that you'd like to share, or do any of you guys have examples that you guys like to share? I think we all have run into these kind of experiences.
Yes, there are, as often is the case, right? I think one of the more common missteps that I would like to call attention to is that, safety doesn't really mean sweeping things under the rug and never talking about them because they make people feel uncomfortable or unqualified, right? I think instead it means actively working to transform, such experiences into learning opportunities, right? And especially when things go wrong. One of the things that I like to think about is that, especially when things go wrong, you want to ensure that attribution is not correlated with punishment, right? So I'm going to give an example, and I know this might sound a bit controversial, so bear with me for a moment. But I actually think that blameless postmortems, or at least the way we tend to think of them, can easily fall into this trap. And let me explain what I mean by that. I've witnessed a few cases where people who have said during a postmortem that we don't really want to ask about who did what, right? Because this is a blameless postmortem, right? We just want to know what happened. We want to figure out how to, make sure it never happens again. And the thinking is that by eliminating any focus on the actors, we're more likely to create a culture of safety. Since no one is essentially vilified, is essentially worried about being vilified when they do something wrong, or push the wrong button, right? But I think this is self-defeating because it means we're basically eliminating a lot of useful context from the equation, right? Sure, we want to focus on what happened and on what we can learn from it, but at the same time, we have to make sure that we don't deny ourselves of a critical source of first-hand information, which is the person or the people who are the front seat when everything was going on. So for me, having a culture of safety means being able to discuss who did what they were thinking, why they did it, right? How our systems responded, how different people responded as well, and still not apportioning blame to any of the actors, right? The fact that someone did something means that there was a combination of contributing factors that allowed that thing to happen. So rather than taking the easy path and attributing the entirety of what happened to just that person who was directly involved, you have to do the hard work of investigating what all those other contributing factors were. And I mean, obviously, this is not an easy thing, right? It's easier to say, this person did this thing, and so that's the issue. but being able to find out what those factors were, and I mean, this is also where it definitely helps when people have the right tools to be able to fill in those missing knowledge gaps. And I think that's kind of where, observability really helps, because you never really have, you always have just bits and pieces of information, and what you want to do is be able to find out, like, what is the real story. So yeah, I mean, that's one of the things that I would say. Like, safety is really, it's there's a lot more hard work to it than just saying, let's not blame people. And I mean, the other thing that I'll probably say is that what we're essentially talking about are very much people things, right? It's not really tooling. You don't improve interpersonal dynamics through mindless application of new tools. It's like, assuming that Jira is going to help you improve, processes, right? It's really how you use it and the culture. So you have to invest intentionally in, people and in building the right kind of culture that you want to see. And that's a hard task.
Yeah. That's amazing. It's amazing.
I do.
Ryan,
I actually really agree with you. The fact that you just did that truly, you can add truly to have sort of like add truly in the hope that it adds to practice. I totally agree with that. I think it's about teaching people how to use the tools to sort of like naturally evolve that practice. Because I think having that natural adoption of tools is really important. We actually create that culture. If you pointed out, the tool is just a really important part of it. And I totally agree with you, Tom.
I think the other interesting bit about this is that focus on contributing factors and that focus on understanding, right? Like, not just what someone did, but why, right? Like, I think that's part of what John Allspaugh's research really speaks to me, right? Like, where he talks about trying to understand what's that state that is not visible, right? Like, what were people's hidden assumptions? And you can't unpack that if you like divorce the people from it.
Yeah, but how do you do that? Like, I mean, everybody says that that's the easy thing to do, but in your career, like, nobody wants to say, I made this mistake, or especially when it's the first time, and we've all been there. So what do you do, like, kind of to loosen the room just a little bit so people can kind of share a little bit more and be a little bit open about and build that trust and the empathy that we are all wanting to get at the end, but at the very beginning in your first room and you see the incident, you have to get there. So, what are you guys doing, or what have you guys done in the past to help that come along?
I mean, like I said, I think there is no easy answer to this, right? I think there's a lot of, but well, I'll actually give an example of, there is a client that I worked with in, I think this was about 2 years ago. And even before we went live, we had the VP of engineering who would basically come into the room and he would say, every morning he would just come and say, you're all doing a great job, right? And then he would go away, right? He would probably ask sometimes for, updates and things like that. But he would say, you're doing a great job and, keep up the good work. And, that's something that it seemed like a small thing, but even when we were having outages, even when we were having issues, he would actually come into the room and say, I know you're doing the best that you can, right? Just keep doing it. And I think it's small things like that that actually help to build people's confidence and help to build, trust and so people are able to know that, even when this is happening, you're not alone. You actually feel supported by, your leadership. You feel supported by your teams as well. And I think it's just things like that.
That's great. Thank you. Ryan, do you have one or two tactical takeaways for the audience also as you're pulling observability to the forefront for your teams? You're doing some Slack at a very high level. So I was hoping you could share one or two couple nuggets for us.
Sure, of course. I both recognize that not every company has the resources to fully staff a monitoring team, which Slack has, and the Twitter has the observability team, for example. That's not always possible. The quality, let me back up a little bit. if you think about observability and we think about this definition of observability, and we think about how we try to measure observability, that might be the obvious answer. Try to measure the quality of your observability in order to drive the adoption or better observability. You can't really do that. How do you measure something that is not visible or none? If you remember, it listed observability is the inference of a distant internal state through the measurement of its internal outputs. So if I look at a service, it's a service owner. I'm not going to know everything about him. And it's Tom kind of highlighted here. Here talking about Blameless postmortems, and we're talking about incident process a little bit here. And that's sort of like the product of wanting our system to be reliable. And we, of course, we all want our product to be reliable. We never want it to go down, but it's going to happen. The best way to latch into that is to use the incident process to highlight visibility gaps. I know it's kind of like a after the fact thing. We always want to be proactive rather than reactive in the company. But that's not always possible. So we try to take what we have today, which are incident and the incident learnings, so we can actually identify visibility gaps, and then have a really robust action item process. Let's say if we have a action item day that the service that have the metric, and we couldn't divide the service because this metric wasn't available at the time of the incident. So it took too much time to actually debug that problem. So you have an action item to add that new metric, and you put a time item. You have to start that ticket by the end of the quarter. And that's how you create that feedback loop. It's slowly over time you create better observability. That's how you get in front of the teams. You make it a priority. And so part of that is definitely having fun to a developer. I know I've said this before, but the tooling really drives that adoption and makes it easy for people to throw the kind of action items. And Honeycomb is really instrumental in that. So
that's great.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, I was going to just add that one of the other things that I found to be really useful is, I mean, we all want to have, I guess we kind of all aspire to have, situations where you basically deploy to production and you can test in production. But I feel like that's not really a great starting point for every team, right? Most teams are still going to have staging environments and dev environments and things like that. And one of the ways to to practice and to use observability is basically use it in all those environments, even before production, right? You don't just use it as it's not something that you're going to, if you're looking at a ways of getting iterative feedback, you're not going to wait until you're in production and then say, let me fire up all my observability systems and make sure that I have all the data that I'm collecting. I think being able to apply that even in those other lower environments and being able to practice beforehand and being able to see changes even before you get into a production environment, those are all ways that you can iteratively improve that process as well.
That's great. That's great. One of the questions that came from the panel was like, do you guys have any recommendations for enforcing the expectations? And what should happen when the expectation is breached? And how do you build leadership support across product and engineering to get folks to take these new expectations seriously?
Yeah, I would love to answer that one. So that's actually a pretty difficult question to answer because the expectations should kind of be everywhere. And it had to be natural. I know that's not the answer that everyone wants to hear, but it has to be natural. You can't sort of artificially enforce these kind of expectations of having good observability onto engineers, onto like leadership, because I, as a leader, can say your service does not have good observability. We need to have a goal. We need to set a goal of better observability, but that's really arbitrary. So you need to come from the bottom up. You need to have that culture of observability. You need to have like good tooling, good practices, and most of all, good trust. If you build that trust, it happens naturally. So if if you set expectations, I think that means that you are having a problem with adoption, or you're having a problem with mutual understanding among everyone. If you make it happen naturally, then you find that you don't need to set expectations.
That's great. Yeah, when leadership and engineering, everybody is aligned, like we've talked about, and then you build the trust that really resonates with other folks. And then when you get other people building support and accountability on the bottom, people then begin to really build into this as part of that culture and are really accountable for what it goes on. So I love what you're saying there, Ryan. It really resonates with me. Liz, I had a follow-up question from from the panel or from the attendees. And if any one of you guys also want to jump in on this, please do. The question is on improving observability. Let's say I have a bunch of microservices and I have integrated honeycomb. And now to go to the next step, I want to add metadata to span or trace contexts. It seems like a huge task to touch every service and endpoints and start adding context information there. Is there any playbook here on how to start making progress here? Or is there another way to think about this?
So the way that I like to talk about this is in terms of like, a person's body, right? Like the data about what requests are flowing through and the basic metadata about those requests, that's kind of the skeleton that you have to have in order to build upon, right? You can kind of flesh out and add meat whenever you need more detail, but if you don't have that skeleton, yes, you're going to be missing critical pieces. So when we think about building out the trunk of that skeleton of your distributed trace graph, right, it's important to focus on your ingest points first, right? Like where's traffic flowing in from my customers, right? And even if I don't have, each individual like finger modeled in the skeleton, right? Like if I at least have the, the stick figure diagram, right? Like of, here are my, here are my arms, here are my legs, right? Like, that may be just good enough, right? So kind of, you don't necessarily have to think about instrumenting every service. For instance, if you're using a framework like Istio, right, like you can use your service mesh to populate some of that data for you. And if you have sufficiently large microservice deployments, you probably already are using something like Istio or Kubernetes, right? So I think that initial deployment strategy is how you get the basic, shape of the skeleton. And then after that, you can add additional spans, you can add additional data specific to each request and to each microservice and kind of flesh out the bones. You don't have to do it all at once, right? So you find latency that you can't quite explain with your existing spans, add more spans, trace more downstream services. So I think it's a question of where your resources are at. And also, does your environment have like shared libraries you can just add one line of code to, and it just gets deployed to every microservice? Or is this a situation where you have to chase down 100 different developers? So very situationally dependent, but focus on the higher impact stuff first. I know, Brian, you've done this recently at pretty large scale.
Yeah, we actually have a PHP monolith that actually made it a little bit easier. So this PHP monolith actually had the trace framework that actually emits to a service that collects the trace spans. So we add a lot of context in there. If the microservices, what we did is that we created a service that actually collects these trace metadata into a different variety of formats. And what that did is that it made it really easy for developers to emit a trace span in any format that they wish, like with a OpenShift, Jaeger, Stipkin, in any protocol that they like, CRPD, HTTP. So we made it really, really easy for them to shoot down immediately out the span, and we gave them a set of patterns and a set of standards. I think overall we started from scratch. It took us about 9 to 12 months roughly to do a full 95% adoption across our Slack. I think it's like 600 engineers across I don't know how many services. And we ingest something like 250 billion events per month into Honeycomb. And that's one percent difference. So it's quite the problem, but we're actually really excited about the progress. Making it easy to look at that data, really key into driving that adoption.
That's just amazing and shows the scale. One other, and along those lines, Tom, you have a lot of people coming from a lot of different teams, and you're always changing or adding folks to your team. And so we're talking about, building trust and stuff, and adding people and building a culture. But so what are some of the strategies that you use to drive adoption of the monitoring products and monitoring tools with your teams, given that you have just people coming from everywhere and everybody using their favorite tool, but just driving a consistent level of adoption for the tools for the teams?
Yeah, I think that's actually a good segue from what we just been talking about. And I think when I look at like adoption, and speaking just broadly, adoption of anything, regardless of what kind of tool it is, I think the two things that really stand out to me are, for something to be adopted, people need to be aware of its existence, right, in the first place. So there's the marketing aspect to it, which is to say, if we're working with a bunch of different teams and we're providing internal tooling, some work has to actually be done to say, we have this tool, we have this capability that you can now use, right? You can't just assume that, because you're building something, everyone is going to know about it, right? And
this is the danger of internal platform teams, right? People assume that you have a captive audience. That is not true, right? Shadow IT exists everywhere. And I think that this is why I'm a huge advocate for developer relations, right? Internal developer relations. More companies need it.
Yep, absolutely. That's spot on, right? And so I think in addition to like the marketing aspect as well, you also have to. I like the fact that you talked about internal development, internal platform teams, right? Because even internal platform teams have they have users, right? And you can't take the shortcuts of just assuming what people want. You actually have to take the time to do the research and talk to your teams and understand, okay, so this is what we're offering, but does this actually work for you? You need to perform surveys and have questionnaires and all kinds of things like that, because you're building a product and you want to measure it. You want to apply the same standard as external products that you might be shipping to other users. So I think that's really important. And I think one thing that you also that can't be understated is you also have to be willing and ready to receive feedback from your users, right? So it's not just pushing your own agenda onto all these teams. You actually have to figure out, okay, what is the feedback and what do I do with it? And you have to go through the process of prioritizing that. And yeah, maybe once you do that, you're probably going to get a bit more adoption than typical.
Yeah, I totally agree. I totally agree with you, Tom. I mean, just thinking about what the problem space is, it's super important. I think it's something that Slack actually struggled with when I first joined the company, because there were a lot of engineers that wanted to build the products, internal product, but the thinkability of products without actually thinking about the users or the problem itself. I totally agree with that.
That's amazing. Even Liz commented in the Slack room is like, don't mandate. And I love what you guys are saying is seek feedback from your customers, like, right, with these tools, because if you seek feedback, then you're going to make it better, and then they're going to approach it as they're part of the solution, as opposed to just, I need to use these tools because somebody said so. That's great.
Absolutely.
That's great. Thank you. Any from any of the panels, any last tidbits that you guys want to leave any of the attendees with for getting started on their journey, or if they're a little bit further along with the mature microservices, what should they take away from this conversation?
I mean, I'll just say it's better to start, just start somewhere, right? I think for especially new teams that are, for whom, observability is a new concept, I think there is a tendency to go and try and read all about it, look up all the products that you have, and you kind of get lost in this analysis paralysis. I would say, just pick something and just start somewhere, and then you can start to iterate on that process. That's really what I would say.
Yeah, I like that. Is like pick something, build trust between teams, and seek feedback from your audience or the people that are using your tools, and then continue to send out surveys and make sure that those surveys are actioned on, because then people will feel like they're a part of the process. First, also, I'd like to thank all of you all. Liz, Ryan, and Tom, thank you for being panelists today. The insights that you shared today are going to be helpful to all of our attendees. And we'll be also continuing the conversation and taking questions on the Lead Dev Slack channel of observability. And so right now, you guys can all head there, and we'll be there answering questions. Thank you for joining it, and we hope to see you guys next time.